And that's the 2023 Italian Grand Prix. The annual return to Monza ended with a Verstappen-Perez 1-2 finish, unsurprisingly, followed by the Ferrari boys of Sainz and Leclerc in third and fourth. Not quite what the home crowd would have wanted, but still a great result nonetheless. Mercedes, Russell and Hamilton 5th and 6th. Albon fighting to an equal season best of 7th with Lando Norris in 8th. Fernando Alonso in 9th and Bottas rounding off the points in 10th place. I'm Bryn Lucas, and joining me this time I have Alex Kalinauckas over there in Monza, and here on home soil, Matt Q. Great to have you both. Welcome. Well, let's start off, shall we, with Ferrari. You might as well, the Tifosi. Now, it wasn't quite the result they would have wanted, but if we look at Carlos Sainz and the result he got, I think he'd be pretty happy with it. He held off Max Verstappen, didn't he, for around 14 laps until the tyre woes got the better of him. He then had a bit of a ding-dong, didn't he, with Perez as well, and even held off his teammate to finish very, very close over the line there. There have been points over the course of this season where Ferrari have not looked all that great, shall we say, but what are both your thoughts on what you saw out there today? Let's start with you over in Monza, shall we, Alex?
I think this is Carlos Sainz's best race weekend in Formula One. I actually asked him that in the post-race press conference. He did that irritating driver thing where he goes, yeah, it's pretty good, but there's probably a race when I was in the midfield in a Toro Rosso that actually you didn't see it, but it was much better. But I think, I'm going to say it for him, this was his best weekend in Formula One. He topped 3 sessions, FP2, FP3, qualifying. Really didn't do a lot wrong in the race. Like, it was always going to be almost impossible to keep the Red Bulls behind, and yeah, he knackered his rear tyres doing that, and yeah, he locked up, and that's what allowed Max Verstappen to come by. But really, it was only a matter of time, and I think that just he can take a lot of heart from that. Like, he really showed amazing fighting spirit, and you know, Ferrari put themselves in a great position. They did what they had to do. They bought basically a Monza specific rear wing. Red Bull didn't do that, and it sort of made things fairly equal. Like, overall, Red Bull was a faster car, but because it had qualified behind, it was going to struggle to overtake because the rear wing just that bit bigger, and the DRS, because the wings, like everything we're talking about, is very relative. The wings, the opening being smaller, just meant that the DRS effect was lessened. So yeah, it made for a good race. Excellent, battles, passing. I thought Sainz really showed you can be firm and fair. Maybe just ran a little bit close to the edge when it came to battling Sergio Perez, but I thought everything else he did with Max Verstappen was very fair. And then what a fantastic scrap between the Ferrari drivers. I think perhaps the team may want to reflect on that it all nearly got a little bit too much, but I described it in my race report as savage, but it was also savagely beautiful in a way.
Yeah, I think we know as well with the way the season's gone that it's about that best of the rest accolade, isn't it? Red Bull, we know how good they are. Perez 1-2 underlined that, and their sort of average fastest laps put Perez in second place with Ferrari's third and fourth. So as Alex says, you know, with Ferrari sort of gearing for that quali setup with the skinny rear wing and new engine, it was about sort of how long, and even Verstappen knew it was a question of how long, not if, but when he was going to come back with his early radio messages. So the fact that Ferrari sort of made it to lap 15 and were well clear of Aston, McLaren, Merc was a strong showing. And I also think on Sky, listening to their coverage after Verstappen got past, there was some debate about whether Sainz should pit straight away to sort of, you know, just at least respond to Red Bull rather than the inevitable, which is falling back. But then, you know, there's a sort of slow realisation that if he pits, he'd be back into traffic and lose out further that way. But Ferrari on that. So after sort of lots of criticism, some of it coming from us about their strategy throughout this season and last, I think this was a convincing display all around, even if that sort of overall pace and Pirelli management wasn't quite first class.
Yeah, on those points there, I mean, you just mentioned it, Alex, as well, about the little battle they had throughout. And there were a couple of radio messages. Verstappen had one, and Perez certainly had one, saying about Sainz moving across a couple of times on the braking zone into the chicane at turn 1, turn 2. That happened a couple of times, and I think right at the very end, I think even penultimate lap maybe, Ferrari on the radio saying, you know, don't do anything stupid, and then Leclerc locks up onto the entrance of that chicane again. What do you think the conversations are going like at Ferrari? I mean, they'll be happy with a third and fourth, I presume, but will they be picking through that one and saying, right, let's not do that again, lads?
Yeah, I think Fred Vasseur has basically said we'll have a little review to look into how things might have gone better with potential team orders. Not necessarily saying that they would do that, but just like, I think they're aware that perhaps it did get a little bit too much. But I think they knew coming into it that third place, if everything went well for the Red Bulls, that was their maximum, and they just desperately wanted to get on that podium. I mean, it was just over my left-hand shoulder here, and the sea of people with the Ferrari flags, with all the sort of the smoke and the flares, which of course you're not supposed to bring into a circuit, so technically that's very, very naughty. But the atmosphere just overall, that you could see why they were so desperate to get up there. And yeah, they talked about it pre-race. I think it was just like, yeah, just keep it clean. But you sense that the more mature thing for the team overall to have done would have been to take control of the situation a little bit more. But, you know, in a way, everybody won because there was no contact. If there had been contact, it would have been, you know, hindsight saying, well, why didn't they step in sooner? But F1 won today. I think everybody, the fans, won today because, yeah, okay, this is Max Verstappen's 10th win in a row, but everyone's talking about Carlos Sainz. And I mean, again, sorry to bring the podium up again, but when the anthems were playing, all I could hear was to folks who going, Carlos. Like, he's the story of the day. So hats off to him. And Ferrari probably got away with it because there was no contact, but at least it's a happy story rather than a sad one.
Certainly wouldn't be the first time we've seen Ferrari drivers come together, and maybe Ferrari could have handled it slightly differently, but they would have been fairly happy, like you say. Let's move on, though, to somebody who is definitely a happy man, and that is Max Verstappen. Before the Grand Prix, they're asking him, you know, are you thinking about these 10 consecutive wins? And he said, no, not really. And he walked off, and then all the commentary went, he's thinking about this 10. But he managed to get the record, didn't he? The record that dates back to Vettel in 2013. And if you look at the first 14 races of this season, he's won 12 of them. And he doesn't look like anyone's going to be able to stop him, does it? It looks like he's got this one, and he can continue to win pretty much until the end of the season. And before you answer this question, I want to throw into this as well that Red Bull have won 24 of the last 25 Grand Prix. Matt, what are your thoughts to start with?
Yeah, I think you can, you know, perhaps look through a bit of history repeating itself if you're clutching at straws. Obviously, Monza is where McLaren's perfect record in 1988 fell apart. Although I still argue that was Senna's fault rather than Schlescher's fault. But that's a different video. Comment down below, I suppose, if you disagree. But you know, I suppose there could have been a fluff start. Overly aggressive battle with Sainz, the extra formation lap with 44 degrees, track temperature 30 degrees, air temperature that might have, you know, upset the Honda PU. But no, there was none of that. And like I said earlier, Verstappen said, I can see Carlos, he's sliding around, but it's all okay. Subtext being, I'm coming at you anyway. It's just a matter of time. So I think it was all in hand. But I think there's a sort of slight interesting differentiation between how Hamilton and Verstappen approach things. Hamilton doesn't really like being asked about his past, whether that's because he's now an older driver, but he always, you know, whether legitimately or feigns it, but he struggles to remember. Whereas Verstappen doesn't really seem to care about the here and now. He never engages on the records, the run of form. I think Alex was in a press conference and he said, well, this 10 record is good for Wikipedia, but neither here nor there for me, or words to that effect. But I suppose that says a lot about his mentality and the fact he doesn't feel the pressure, and all of that is probably partly why he's on such a good run.
Yeah, I think just to pick up the Wikipedia thing, I think Toto Wolff's also sort of gone in on that and gone, nobody reads Wikipedia anyway. But that's the wrong way to look at it. Like that, he's done something absolutely historic. I think just when it comes to Max not answering, it's what he does. He doesn't want to give anything away to give an edge, and also at the same time, I think we should not forget I think he's quite honest in his answers. Like if something that's genuinely doesn't bother him, he's not gonna feign that he is overly interested in it. But equally, you know, if you attach too much to something, it might not come true. So he's sort of guarding against that. It's that whole next race up mentality. So yeah, I think I think that sort of covers off why Max responded in the way he did today. But hats off to him, a tremendous record. Unique in F1 history. We know Sebastian Vettel's very supportive of him doing it, and very pleased to see those records tumbling. Although I'm sure, of course, he would have liked to have held on to his little bit of history there. But the other element to this is that there's been quite a bit of needle this weekend between Mercedes and Red Bull, and Lewis Hamilton in particular. I think Lewis sort of was asked, "So, Valtteri Bottas stopped you getting like 10 in a row in the record," and Lewis was like, "Well, I had quicker teammate, didn't I?" And there's still something. So I'm very much here for that.
Very quickly on that, Alex, I mean, you're out there. What are your thoughts on Lewis Hamilton this weekend? He seemed to be more of the grumpy Lewis Hamilton that we've seen in the more recent past.
Yeah, it's obviously been a very hard weekend in terms of Mercedes didn't have the ultimate pace. They didn't have podium challenging pace. George Russell had him covered in qualifying and the race. So it never really came together for Lewis. And I think that, there was that the experiments that he tried in FP2 with sort of bigger aero parts around the rear brakes that didn't go well, and then it's battling back from that. But yeah, we also saw sort of a really odd, quite poor error, very poor error. Let's say it. Moving across in front of Oscar Piastri and rightly penalised for that. It's almost like, I think 5 seconds. Some people say, well, you destroyed Piastri's race. Why only 5 seconds? Well, it's because the stewards, they have set criteria of what penalties they can and can't award, and that was what they had to go for. But yeah, an odd weekend for Hamilton, and it's just at a time where things okay in the Mercedes camp. I think I've said it on our podcast before. James Vowles going, is that really being felt at the moment? That there's these strange strategy things creeping in and Williams are shining, stuff like that. Is it too simple to say the two are linked simply because one person moved? But yeah, an odd weekend for Lewis Hamilton.
We'll stay with people that are not so grumpy, though, because why should we focus on the grumpier ones? Let's look at somebody who isn't grumpy, and that's Alex Albon. I mean, he's equalled his season's best, 7th overall. He looks very comfortable in that car, doesn't he? I mean, is there some magic that he's finding in the FW44, or is there something else that we can attribute to his recent successes? Let's start with you, Matt.
Well, Bryn, I really hate the thing that drivers out-driven a car. Well, no, you can't sort of beat the laws of physics into submission. So Albon was doing what the FW44 was capable of. But, the mid-season surge is mega. The team have said, we're not developing this anymore. So, as everyone else is sort of meant to be coming back past the car, this run of form is excellent. But there are caveats with that. One is that, only half the garage is doing that well. Logan Sargeant still struggling. And B, the team are still struggling to understand why they're good at Silverstone, why they weren't so good at Spa, which is, meant to be a track that suits them. And they were so dependent on a headwind/tailwind in Zandvoort to explain that run of form. So there's still not, I wouldn't say there's a perfect understanding. And also, this car is, efficient in a straight line, doesn't produce class-leading levels of downforce. So it's almost out the factory. It's a Monza spec, so should run well here. And you do have the slight caveat of, Nick de Vries sort of almost basically earned an F1 seat based on one race here where he did mega in that Williams, but Albon has gone better. So sort of that car is good here. But that raises the bigger debate, which I've seen a few things on social media about over the last couple of sort of races, is whether Albon's mega run of form, does that show he has come on leaps and bounds since his Red Bull days, or is this reflective of being a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and that if he did go against a first-rate team again, he'd be chewed up? That's, again, as all my answers seem to allude to, it's probably a video for another day, but separate to that, a really strong drive again from Albon.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of everything, isn't it? It's Williams getting better and Albon thriving in that environment. He's clearly a significant step above Logan Sargeant, and it's almost like he's becoming the George Russell figure that Russell was at Williams. I know they're great friends. It's probably helpful that they are in that situation for Albon. But yeah, excellent weekend, excellent in defence against the McLaren cars. Not really much he could do against Lewis Hamilton on those fresher tyres. But yeah, it's sort of like with Williams, they're not making the sort of errors. They're grabbing the opportunities when they're there. So for example, like they're on a purple patch because they, for want of a better phrase, fluked it a little bit at Zandvoort because of the way the wind direction was blowing. Like Dave Robson confirmed, speaking here this weekend, that yeah, it was the direction the wind was coming. They'd almost feared it coming from the other direction, so it really helped things there. So when the opportunity's there, they're grabbing it, and that's the sign of a slick operation. And you've got a driver thriving with Albon. And when the 2025 driver market lights up, you've got to be thinking he might be a candidate if there's a shock big move somewhere else. Obviously not going back to Red Bull, but with the form he's producing and Williams on the up, anything's possible for him.
Just staying with that, Alex, very, very briefly, Logan Sargeant maybe not getting the same out of the car as Alex Albon. Probably we expect that, him being so new to Formula One. But he doesn't have a contract. He's still a TBC, isn't he, by his name for 2024. So is it now that we're getting to the sharp, pointy end when it comes down to contract signing that he's starting to feel the pressure of it? It was not a bad result for him today, but if you compare it to Alex Albon, it's night and day, isn't it?
It is. I must confess I haven't seen the incident that led to him getting his 5-second penalty, so I can't really comment on that. But it's not very helpful to have that happen. Yet he was pretty strong in terms of his pace and getting towards that, finally getting that point. So he's making progress towards it, but obviously still erring when it matters. Or at least on the face of someone earning a penalty, the stewards obviously felt that there was enough of a mistake there to hand that out. But yeah, There is. I mentioned the 2025 driver market earlier because that's where the big teams are all looking because their drivers are set for next year. But at the back of the grid, Williams, Alfa Romeo, things are still open for several seats. So there's potentially going to be some movement there. And I think there's been a lot of discussion that is pretty accurate that Sargeant wasn't Vowles' choice, and he in fact rejected him from the Mercedes Junior program. So yeah, you could understand why the decision, if that's what it becomes, that he is going to get dropped, you can understand why that was going to be made, but it's got to be balanced against the fact that he's a rookie, he does need time, and mistakes are going to come. But at the very least for Williams, it's not like his not being on Albon's level is really costing them so much because Albon is delivering at the same time.
Yeah, let's just stay with drivers that are people's decisions then. So let's go to Mercedes and Toto Wolff and George Russell. We've mentioned Hamilton already. On the lead up to this, Toto was saying they had a 10 kilometre per hour time trap deficit to all the other drivers around the speed trap difference. Through this one here, with Monza and their setup, they had quite a few problems. But what do you think was the overall result for them, this 5th and 6th? Were Mercedes, would they be happy with that going into it? Looking at how George seemed to outpace Lewis a fair bit?
I think relative to the competition, at least they beat the Aston Martins. They were even further back with a draggy package, and this track was always going to suit Ferrari superbly because it's focused on being better in a straight line, and it can ride the curbs really nicely, as we saw in Baku. Like Carlos Sainz doing well in qualifying is not too dissimilar to Charles Leclerc doing well in Baku. So yeah, I think not a lot much more Mercedes could have done. At least it rescued 4th and 5th. The sort of remarkable thing is that both drivers overcame a 5-second penalty because it was a strange sort of weird thing with Ocon and George Russell, and then by the time the team realised that they probably should have given the place back or give Ocon the place back, it was almost cheaper to take the penalty rather than drop back and hand in the place. So yeah, a tough weekend following on from a very hard one in Zandvoort when I think Mercedes were hopeful of really big things, and they just got to get to Singapore, which should suit the car a little bit better, although the bumpy rides, it's not been a big strength of Mercedes since the start of this new era. So it needs to come together for them fast.
Liam Lawson then, I want to touch upon Liam Lawson very quickly because he dropped into that seat at AlphaTauri, not really used to it. He's over doing his racing or applying his craft, shall we say, in Japan with Super Formula. He drops into that seat, it's his second race, and he's managed to achieve an 11th, which is only one position back from their best this season that Yuki Tsunoda's got a number of times. What are your thoughts on Liam Lawson? Let's start with you, Matt.
On the whole, the way he has executed Zandvoort, incredibly tricky with the mixed conditions, and again here has been spot on. The penalty at Zandvoort was a team error from him. There's been very, very little to sort of pick fault in. I don't want to be over pessimistic, but I say there are two caveats to that. One is obviously teammate Tsunoda retiring on the formation lap, so losing that benchmark of what that car was capable of in the race. I think the second point is that perhaps we all feel a bit tentative, all want to give a health warning after Nick De Vries' starring cameo here in the Williams last season. That obviously led to him getting to that AlphaTauri drive, which then went to Ricciardo, injured, Lawson in. So whether coming to this track and performing admirably is a proper litmus test. But I think in terms of the way he's sort of carried out everything procedurally, he's been spot on. He's had a few things to contend with now, aborted starts, half a dozen pit stops, changing tyres, whatever, red flags. He's had a lot to contend with, and he seems to know his rule book inside and out. So fair play to him for that.
Yeah, I think with Lawson, other than the sort of the Zandvoort practice spin little thing, we've seen relatively few mistakes, and I think that's really almost half the battle as a rookie, especially a rookie dropped in with no testing, unexpected injury replacement. So yeah, I think hats off to Liam Lawson, and the suggestion coming out of the Red Bull camp, Christian Horner tonight, is that this may not have been his last opportunity. I think Ricciardo's injury is not going to be a super rapid return, and maybe Lawson gets a couple more races.
That'll be exciting to see. Let's just have a quick glance, shall we then, to a couple of weeks' time, Singapore. Maybe Lawson there, who knows, but what are you two looking out for when F1 takes itself East.
It sounds really sort of niche, but I'm looking forward to the upgrades actually, because, you know, end of the European season, so suddenly freighting everything to Singapore is, you know, a hell of a lot more expensive. So who's still pushing that late on to bring new packages, trying to optimize for that? And does it say anything? Because we are, let's face it, in terms of timeline, we're getting closer and closer towards the end of the season, where if we don't hear about necessarily cost cap breaks, we'll be hearing about teams who are getting compliance reports and from that deducting who hasn't. So if Aston or you know, Haas turn up with brand new cars that they've shipped to the other side of the world, and then, you know, there's talk of them not getting compliance talks, maybe it'll be a bit obvious as to why. So I think that is just the sort of a little detail that might be worth reading when that FIA document lands, saying what new bits have been bought.
For me, I'm going slightly more superficial, perhaps. Although for the drivers, very much not so. It's a different layout this time at Singapore. They're both having to make changes at a few corners because I think there's been some building work being done on that track, so it will look a bit different to previous years. But also, I mean, they could just be saying this for having a laugh, I don't know, but both Red Bull drivers in the press conference insisting that the next weekend it's not going to be straightforward from them, and we know the car is good on its ride, but it has had problems with curbs and bumps. Like Verstappen was noticeably staying away from the curbs at Ascari in a way that Sainz wasn't in qualifying yesterday. So it could be a bogey track for Red Bull. It's just, it would be really stupid it would be really stupid to bet against them in any case.
Thank you very much to you both, and thanks to you for watching. What did you think of the race today? Let us know your comments by putting them in below. And also don't forget to subscribe and check out all the rest of the coverage for the rest of this season and beyond.